places, and we'll see how it works. So unless there are any other logistical questions, what we're going to do is a welcome again for another year of Lunch and Learn, Rabbi Eric, who so generously puts in the time to prepare, and thank all of you for joining us today. If you want to add others to our welcome list, let me know and I'll put them on the email chain. So Eric, thank you for all you do. You have the floor, and we'll repeat the CLE logistics at the end in case folks join late. Go for it.
Well, I want to thank a number of people here. Definitely Megan. I also want to thank Len for hosting and captaining this. I want to thank the AI staff who are our branch office today. Next month, we will flip this, and because it will be the Festival of Sukkot, we're going to see if the Wi-Fi is strong enough to actually be in the sukkah at Adath Israel, and also, of course, down here at Holland and Knight. And I also want to thank Jerry Riesenbach for hosting us in the times that we were able to physically gather downtown, and the times that Len was by the train station. But it seems like we always find our way back to One Liberty. You know, it's like somehow you always find your way back home.
Especially.
Right, exactly. You can't get out of this building, Len. So I am grateful. I am also grateful to all of you who, it feels like I made the joke, like we're putting the band back together wherever we are. And I am mindful that in addition to our two sort of poles of gathering in Marion and downtown, that there are so many people who have joined from afar. And I am aware, without calling anyone or embarrassing anyone, that especially in particular today, this is meaningful and important because one of our cherished members who is from Pittsburgh is with us. And so especially in light of our topic today, I'm grateful. I'm just feeling very grateful to be back with you all digitally, personally, distance, near, far, wherever you are. So we're going to hop in.
I wanted to add, and I apologize for interrupting, one of our earliest Lunch and Learn attendees very sadly passed away. Lana Ehrlich passed away, and she was years ago a very loyal and frequent member of our Lunch and Learn community, and we miss her today, and I wanted to recognize that.
Yes, thank you. And she, in my last conversations with her, you know, acknowledged this chevra as part of her Adath Israel and her other chevra, you know, a sense of gathering as well. And maybe we can dedicate this learning in her memory. So, what we're going to talk about today is we're going to talk about capital punishment. And especially in light of the recent death penalty sentencing of the Pittsburgh Tree of Life synagogue shooter, we're going to investigate the Jewish views of this with a recognition that, like most of the topics that Len and I choose for Lunch and Learn, nothing is black and white. It would be a very short CLE. Megan would not approve something where I told you the answer and we turned off the Zoom. This is worthy of a lot of nuance. And I know a lot of back and forth, not only in Jewish debate, but in sort of our kishkas, right? Because we have a core Jewish value of upholding the sanctity of life. And yet, one could definitely make the case that there are ways through one's guilt and through one's desecration of human life that a person forfeits the right to life. And in addition, we should have said this before. We're going to ask that people mute unless you're having unless you're doing a question, you have a question, just because there's so many people on, which is lovely. We're good. But the question is, does the death penalty and as it is implemented in modern times, does it affirm or dilute this core Jewish value of upholding the sanctity of life? Do we need something this extreme to say that someone who takes human life is forfeiting the right to life? Do we take that responsibility on ourselves? How do we decide, and under what circumstances do we decide to take that on? Judaism has really struggled with this over time. So I'm going to give a little bit of background on this, and then we're going to dive into some of the texts. I would say, to characterize the Jewish understanding of the death penalty, there's no question that the death penalty exists, going back to biblical law, and is affirmed, at least in theory, in rabbinic law. It is a part of the legal system. It is a part of the punitive aspect of the legal system. There is no question about that. There are, frankly, dozens of crimes, most of which I think you can be thankful that currently in Judaism there is not an active death penalty, because we would, almost all of us, be, for at least one of these crimes, liable for the death penalty. Things like desecration of Shabbat in any number of different ways. Things like not following laws of sexual propriety and impropriety. Many of these earn you the death penalty. There are actually 4 death penalties in Judaism because we are overachievers. So you can be executed according to, and they have different levels of severity and things like that. You can be executed by stoning, burning, strangulation, and sword. Okay? And there are different, I know, gruesome, right? And there are different ways of understanding what those were. For example, stoning, there is it was not, pebbles, right? Like you understand it to be. At least according to one account, stoning was, they would put you in a valley that was narrow on both sides with a long downward slope, and they would take care of the effort by one stone, one big boulder. You would be at the bottom of the hill, right? These were pretty gruesome, right? And so the fact is that Judaism has the death penalty, and also, as is often true, and we actually talked about this at Adat Israel last week, as is often true, the reason I introduce it this way is because the rabbis were skittish about it. So your "Oy, oh God, oh no," response to that is actually exactly what the rabbis of the Talmud also, by and large, said, which is that they were very cautious and very circumspect when it came to implementing the death penalty. So they had this thing where you could be liable to the death penalty without actually receiving the death penalty, as a means of speaking to the severity of the crime, of the sin, as it were, without actually being executed. So, and I had a professor, he's still one of my teachers at the seminary, who said this to us about Shabbat. Rabbi Joel Roth said, at one point in time, he was talking about his Shabbat practice. He said, well, I wouldn't do that because by my understanding of the law, that would be a violation of Shabbat, and then I'd be liable to death penalty. And everyone laughed, like you just did. Everyone laughed, and he said, don't laugh. Just because there is no court that can actually execute me, that has the power in modern times to execute me, does not mean that the severity of the wrongdoing is not spoken to by the fact that I would be liable, that on my conscience would be a misdeed worthy of, even if we couldn't actually do the execution. You're fine, right? Okay. So that's the way in which the rabbis sort of did this. In order to understand how cautious they were, I'm just going to go very quickly. We could have spent the entire time on this. I'm going to go very quickly, a sort of description of the precautions. So, Larry. Oh, that is really not.
I'll come get it.
Thank you. So in order for someone to be executed, you needed two witnesses that corroborated one another. They could not be related to one another. They had to be observant of the commandments of the written and oral law. They had to be well established professionally in life. The witnesses had to be able to see one another, make eye contact during the time of the transgression. They had to be able to speak clearly so that they could issue a warning to the person who was doing the sin that was worthy of the death penalty. They could not be related to each other or the accused. The warning, known as the hatra'ah, which means warning or cautionary exercise, they had to be able to tell the person, hey, do you know that you're about to do this thing that is liable? It's a capital offense. They had to say that to the person, and the person had to, and that had to be done within seconds of the actual commission of the crime. And in the same amount of time, the person about to sin had to respond that she or he was familiar with the punishment and that they were going to sin anyway and begin the act of sinning. So, to give you a sense of how this works, if I'm about to commit a capital offense, any of the, I don't know if you all count, okay, out there, because you're too far from me, but anyone here could see one another. They could say, hey, Yanov, you're about to do something that's going to earn you the death penalty. Do you know that? And before, within seconds, literally within 5 to 6 seconds, I would have to say, yes, I don't know. Yes, I know that, and I'm going to do it anyway. And then I would have to do it. And all of that would have to be testified by witnesses. Okay? Then the other things that they sort of delimited when someone could get the death penalty, each witness was then taken out by the rabbinical court and examined individually. They were actually, we're going to get to this in the text, they were actually intimidated, saying, do you know the effect of your testimony right now, that you could, I'll get you a second, that you could actually cause someone to die? The Beit Din, the court, had to have a minimum of 23 judges. It could not be a simple majority of 12 to 11. You had to have a minimum of 13 convicting, and you could not have a unanimous verdict. This is different from my understanding of U.S. law, right? You could not. My understanding of capital punishment is that it has to be most times it has to be a unanimous verdict. Not always.
No, it's set by the states. Florida does not have.
Oh, Florida does not require that. Does it?
I think that's a recent.
It's a recent
It's
thing.
still being tested.
Got it. So, but the understanding was, if it were a unanimous verdict, that the Beit Din would then be accused of being biased towards the prosecution or against the defendant, and if they didn't have it in their hearts to find something, even one small thing redeeming about this person, if no one of the 23 rabbis could find even one redeeming thing, then they must be biased. There was something wrong with the court. It's me, not you, kind of thing, and then they would be acquitted. The witnesses were appointed by the court to be the executioners in some point in time. So, if the stoning, they were the one pushing the boulder down, right? And then there was a period of public inquiry on the slow walk, and it was intended to be a slow walk from the place of the court to the place of the execution, in which there was someone called a korez, which was basically a town crier, saying, hey, hear ye, this guy's about to be executed. If anyone knows anything to mitigate this punishment, let him speak now. And this would go on for, it sounds like, in several hours, and it doesn't matter how many times it happened. If any one person, even, by the way, the convicted person himself, came up with something or said, they would all go back to the court, retry the trial, and then start the whole process again, assuming that it was still a conviction. And even if the guy said, oh, I just remembered something, I want to testify on my behalf, he could testify on his own behalf. This is how cautious we were, right? And if not, there was, it seems like some sort of life imprisonment without possibility of parole kind of thing that would happen. They would imprison the person. They would make the life imprisonment relatively short by not feeding them well. Okay, so it was not like a 30-year prison. So I want to stop here because that I'm giving you the caution piece, but I'm giving you both the fact that it existed and the caution. I think you could make the case that both of those affirm life in some way. I'm going to take questions or comments right now, and then we're going to dive into the text because the text gives us some sense of how difficult this process was. So any questions? Gordy, go ahead. And if you're online, we'll stop for that too. Yeah.
So the question is, if it's a requirement that the transgressor has to stay before he or she transgresses, I know it's a sin, I'm going to transgress anyway. Wouldn't a clever transgressor just say nothing and proceed with the transgression?
So could everyone hear that? Just raise a hand or two if we okay, good. The mics are working. Good. Okay, so yes, there can be sort of scheming like that. However, if the person were a repeat offender,
Never be.
what?
Couldn't be.
No. If the person did this little tricky thing, right? Okay. Yeah, it makes it pretty hard to be. It's hard to be a repeat offender if you get convicted, right? But so it seems that first of all, the witnesses have to sort of suss out, right, whether there's the person is stable, is scheming and things like that. But there were lower non-death penalty levels for things that this level of hatra'ah, of warning that determined that someone was purposefully committing a capital crime. If you are not purposefully committing a capital crime, there are still bad things that happen to you, right? So if they couldn't suss it out in that way. The other thing I should say about scheming, by the way, they were also very concerned that witnesses would scheme to get someone killed without actually doing it. And so they put in a statute that if you were tried as a scheming witness, which is known as an aid zomem, which means essentially that you were, doing this thing, right? I don't know what that's called, okay, scheming.
Conspiracy.
I couldn't remember, conspiracy, right? If you were a conspiring witness and you were determined by other witnesses to have been conspiring in a separate sort of parallel case, you received the punishment for the crime that you had conspired to befall someone else. So in this case, the witness would be executed. This is how you can see how cautious it is. Any other questions or comments before we get to how it was actually happen, how it actually happened?
Anybody over at the synagogue want to comment?
You guys can comment, happy as a comment.
Okay, we're good. And anyone online?
I have a question.
Yeah.
It seems that once you start reading the Torah, when we're into about Deuteronomy, like at least 3 or 4 times in every parsha, someone's being stoned to death. So it seems, or I'm sorry, there's a crime that would lead to being stoned to death. So how cautious were they? I mean, do you get witnesses every time? Do you get excused, or are you actually stoning everybody to death?
So it's a good question. I think that was Amy, right?
Yes, yes.
So yes, the words that come out in especially the Torah portions that we're in right now, the words that you hear a lot are mot yumat, which means that person shall most definitely die, right? Okay, and when you see those words mot yumat, it sounds pretty vicious. And because there are so many, I mean, several dozen crimes, Amy, to your point, that are liable the death penalty, these precautions were ways to make it seem like it wouldn't happen very often, even if there were a lot of people who were violating Shabbat or violating the 2 main categories that seem, frankly, most likely, besides, obviously, you could be executed for murder, right? You could be executed for things like that. But the ones that are less common for us, in our mentality are, the ritual violations and the sexual violations, right? Again, most of these, I think were theoretical that you could be, executed for these things because, not to be scandalous here, but I want us to pause with, and I'm blushing as I'm saying this, I want us to pause for a moment. If, let's say, there are 1 or 2 dozen laws of sexual impropriety that for their to actually go through with capital punishment, the bar of witnessing and talking to someone else in flagrante delicto is unlikely. I mean, I'm blushing even saying, like, I'm trying to imagine. Maybe I shouldn't try to imagine this close to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. I'm trying to imagine, right? Mitchell's saying, "Yeah, you're going to wipe it off clean anyway," right?
Right.
I'm,
imagining it as a sin.
right. I'm wondering if I have to, repent on Yom Kippur for even saying this. I thought maybe if I said it in Latin, it was better if I say it in Latin. So the likelihood that any of these would ever happen is very slim, very low. And yet the Torah says, and this is why my teacher sticks in my head here, that the Torah is making the claim that this is beyond the pale. That's what the Torah is saying. And so I think you're right, Amy, that it wasn't like, oh my God, we got to grab 23 rabbis. We got every 20 minutes we have a capital case. That's not what this is like. It's not like you ever see that Saturday Night Live skit where it says, studies show that a man is assaulted every 90 seconds in America. We want to meet that man, right? And the same guy gets hit over and over again. But it's not like that. I don't think it actually rose to the level of a court case, because you need the witnesses first. You need to set it up. You need the witnesses to come and say, we need to convene this court. There's a lot of logistics for this. It didn't happen so frequently, though it theoretically could happen. Does that make sense? I don't know if that answers the question, but I think that's in practice.
It's a scare tactic. Don't do it.
Yeah, and it's a scare tactic not only for, and this is now we're going to get into the text, it was a scare tactic not only for the person who thought, well, maybe I'll do this, but for everyone else too. Because let's not forget that even today, part of the punishment system of the judicial system is designed to be deterrence. How many of you have slowed down suddenly as you're approaching what turns out afterwards to be an empty police car? They have no intention of arresting you or giving you a ticket. They're not even there to do it. It's just a deterrent.
Or pulling over in general.
That's right, that's a good point. Bob said I'm pulling over in general, because think about it. How many of you look at your speedometer when you see the poor schmo who got pulled over, right? That is a deterrence. The fact that it takes that long, it doesn't really take that long to get pulled over and get a ticket. But the whole time that you're on the side of the road and everyone else is zoom, 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 it's saying, don't do it. You could be next there, but for the grace of the police department, go you. Right? Okay. Any other questions online? And then we'll get to Gordy as well.
Yes, I have one.
Yes.
Let's assume that we question whether the Torah was written by God and brought down by Moses during the Exodus.
Okay.
And that we view it, this is something that was written by sages over a period of time. That time, whenever it was, and I don't know that anyone knows, society was different than Talmudic times.
Yes.
I mean, at the Exodus, we were basically a group of tribes. coming out of slavery. By Talmudic times, we had something of a society.
Yes.
And it strikes me as being not a whole lot different than what we allow our Supreme Court to do, because that's how we're set up, looking at the words that are in the Constitution. Different times, different interpretations.
Yes, and so I think that that's true, Stan, and we see that, right? Because the way that the death penalty was, pardon the pun, executed before there were rabbinic courts was essentially, and we have narrative cases of this in biblical times, but essentially Moses says, "Hey God, I think we got one," and God says, "Yeah, we got one," and then they stone the guy, right? God was the judge and jury on that, right? In rabbinic times, they had this very specific thing, which I've given you, shared you about 23 judges and things like that. Once Solomon's temple, it became very temple centric too, that even in priestly times, right, which were kind of between the biblical, the Torah times and the rabbinic times, it became very temple centric, and there were sages even then too. In modern times, and certainly probably before this, but certainly since the destruction of the Second Temple, there has not been, to be clear, there has not been capital punishment in Judaism, because the structures of authority that would allow that to happen don't exist, specifically a Sanhedrin, right? A set of appointed and duly recognized judges with the authority to do this, right? You couldn't just be your average guy. It's not like I can go to the seminary and be like, "Hey, I need a capital punishment court right now," right? Okay, you can't do that. That's not the way it works, because they wanted to keep it very narrow in terms of, you couldn't just, have branch courts that were executing people left and right. Gordy, one question, then we'll go into some text.
It's more of a comment. I've been waiting for this because you've talked about death penalty losing its deterrent value. So perhaps in biblical times, it would still be believed that the death penalty is a deterrent. But back in the 60s or 70s here, or maybe it was in Canada when they abolished capital punishment, the belief was that the death penalty was not a deterrent. And I think with studies to back that up. So just a comment.
So no, I think it's fair, and this is part of the debate. There are definitely studies that you can find opinions and studies on both. Deterrence is a very hard thing to study, right? Because it's almost as hard as having these hatra'ah warnings here. Hey, you who are about to commit that crime, if you knew that you were going to get punished in such and such a way, would you not commit that crime? Right? And especially when it comes to capital punishment, it's almost impossible to have a study in that way. However, we can sort of projecting what would work. Let's go into a couple of the texts, and then they will certainly elicit more questions. My sense here is where we are is that the death penalty exists. It exists sort of in extremis, right? That only in the most egregious cases. And by the way, I think this, I'll say my own personal take on this, and some may agree or disagree. If you allow a capital punishment in extremis, if you are not completely seeking to abolish it, then the tree of life crime, murders, certainly would be that extreme case. If you have not said a complete no, a complete abolishing of the death penalty, then in a sanctuary, in a safe place of worship, mediated not only by premeditated murder, but also by a hatred that society wishes to abolish from its midst, to rule out of its midst, that of all the things that make something extremist, the only one this didn't have was the murder of a law enforcement officer.
There was, just to be technical, I agree that the death penalty should be implicated here, but there was no warning, as in the Torah.
Right, so the Torah, by the Torah standards, you are correct, right? But the Torah standards renders it. Huh? Hello, good to see you. By the Torah standards, it is almost impossible. Let's give this to you. So let's take a look really quickly. Would someone, I think because of our technology here, anyone can read. I don't have to read. Normally I have to be the one reading because it's only one.
Might want to share.
Yeah.
Share the screen.
Yeah, I'm gonna share the screen of the text here, so that the people who are online can also see. Look at that. Wow. Okay. Would someone like to read, and know that once I share the screen, I can't see you all, but would someone like to read the English of this first? This is yet another text that would show how cautious we are on this. Anyone want to?
George, I'm happy to read it.
Please go for it.
A Sanhedrin that executes a transgressor once in 7 years is characterized as a destructive tribunal.
Okay, so once in 7 years, this goes back to Amy's question. How often could this possibly have happened with all these, capital crimes? And now the rabbis come in to really try to delimit this and say once in 7 years would be a bloodthirsty, is maybe even a better word for it, court, right? They want to execute someone. Keep going, Josh.
Since the Sanhedrin would subject the testimony to exacting scrutiny, it was extremely rare for a defendant to be executed. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says this categorization applies to a Sanhedrin that executes a transgressor once in 70 years.
So now we're talking, and it almost starts to feel like hyperbolic speech. And the Talmud, by the way, loves hyperbolic speech, right? Once in 7 years, once in 70 years, right? They would even forget how to do it at that point in time, right? Okay. And so once in 70 years would be considered destructive. Okay, continue on, Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva.
Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva say, if we had been members of the Sanhedrin, we would have conducted trials in a manner whereby no person would ever have been executed.
So now you see even more so. They often try to one-up one another. Oh, I won't do it 70. I won't do it 70. I'll never do it. Okay, I see your 70 and raise you infinity, right? Okay. Okay, continue on.
Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, in adopting that approach, they too would increase the number of murderers among the Jewish people.
So here we go. Now, the problem with hyperbolic speech is that it goes, I don't know why I'm really into the Latin and the Greek today, ad absurdum. It would go ad absurdum, right? You could argue this law out of existence. And that's in fact what it seems that Rabbi Tarfon and Rabbi Akiva want to do, is they want to so make it so impossible with all this witness testimony and such proximity to the law, to the crime, et cetera, that they want to legislate it out. They're not going to remove those laws from the Torah. By the way, if they edited them out of the Torah would be a lot, Hagba would be a lot easier, right? Because there are a lot of those laws, just knock them out, right? Okay, but they won't do that, but they're going to make it so impossible. And by the way, the rabbis do this often when they don't like a law, when it gets them in the kishkas. They make it impossible to, in reality, make this law happen. The law becomes completely theoretical, right? But Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says, if that's the case, and you go all the way, and no one then fears the law, and this goes back to deterrence, then if that's the case, then the law loses its intended effect, which was not necessarily to execute, 6 or 7 people a day. The law was intended to express its severity. And when everyone says, oh, that's just theoretical, makes the law lose its intended effect, right? And we know all of this. Right? We know this from disciplining children and students and things like that. If they don't believe you're going to do it once, right? We have this when I work at a summer camp and there's a group of kids who are out of control and you're saying, look, there's so many kids and we're not going to kick them all out of camp. And my response is always, you don't have to kick them all out of camp. There's one who's most egregious, the one who's fomenting the issue the most. You need one. Right? I don't have to You only need the one, because that is what it is. In fact, not in this particular thing about the death penalty, but in other cases where the rabbis try to delimit the law so much so that it never happens, the punchline is not that it never happened. This is, for example, true 2 weeks ago. We had the case of the stubborn and rebellious child who could be executed by his parents, right? Okay, tell that to your teenagers, right? And but it says, oh, that would never happen. It says lo haya v'lo atid liot. It never happened and never is destined or in the future will happen. And then Rabbi Yonatan comes along in that particular case and says, nope, it happened once. And I visited that kid's grave, right? Meaning it's not theoretical. You need one, right? And Rabbi Shimon Gamliel seems to be saying the same thing, that if it becomes completely outside of possible, then the death penalty loses its deterrence. All potential murderers would know, come on, they're not going to execute me, whatever, okay? And this comes from this saying that the deterrence comes from this saying in Deuteronomy, again, 2 weeks ago in the Torah portion. It says, "Uviarta hara mikirbecha." You shall sweep the evil from your midst. And then it says, "V'chol Yisrael yishma'u v'yira'u." All Israel will hear it and see it, and you'll be afraid. You'll be afraid, right? And that's the deterrence piece. But the first half of that verse, "Uviarta hara mikirbecha," is equally important, is that if there is an evil in our midst, and I think this is one that applies particularly in a case like Tree of Life. Judaism also has something, and I think that emotionally we have this as well. When an evil act exists in our society, we have a gut need to be rid of it. Even if we are not actually ourselves victims, perpetrators, witnesses, or judges to the event, we know that it exists and we are sick to our stomach. And in some ways, if you think of the rare instances of the death penalty, you think of Israel's only organized Israel post the state. There was only one time that Israel has used the death penalty, and it was Eichlein. And I think that part of that was because he was an architect for such an incontrovertibly evil thing that you had to take an action that was so extreme because it was the only way you could restore balance to the universe. And that exists as well in Judaism. And maybe someone who's against the death penalty would say, well, you can't put that on one crime or on one perpetrator, right? But what other choice is there? Right? Because the crime is so egregious and so debilitating to our sense that our world is mostly just, that we have to take an action that other than that, we would never do because it's that bad. Again, it's how serious a statement it is to actually use the death penalty. And that is the next text. It's a very weird text from Deuteronomy. If someone would like to read the bottom text on the first side, the first page, would someone like to read? Again, I can't see you all, and I will move it up so you can see it. Any volunteers to read? I promise I'll interrupt you. Does that help?
I'll read it. It's Hillary.
Thank you. Hillary, there you go.
If in the land that Adonai your God is giving you to possess, someone slain is found lying in the open.
So first of all, these laws mostly only apply to in the land of Israel. A lot of these laws only apply to in the land of Israel, and the judicial system only applied to in the land of Israel when we had jurisprudence, right? In the diaspora, no one was executed. you couldn't be executed, right? So, go crazy in Philadelphia, but if you're in Jerusalem, you're in trouble. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so here's the situation. We find a dead body. Go ahead.
The identity of the slayer not being known, your elders and magistrates shall go out and measure the distances from the corpse to the nearby towns.
Okay, so here we go. This is a dead body not in the jurisprudence of one town, right? In jurisdiction, sorry, of one town. And we don't know who the perpetrator is. There are no witnesses. And so the first thing they do is they measure which town is closest. Why do you think they do that? Jurisdiction. But it's even more than jurisdiction. It's who is most maybe likely, if you wanted to try, well, we're already past trying to find the person. It's also who is most, what society is most personally affected by this, right? Now you have to read this law and you have to say like there are particulars to this law, but also in the particulars, there's clearly a value statement that's, go ahead, Hillary.
The elders of the town nearest to the corpse shall then take a heifer, which has never been worked, which has never pulled a yoke, and the elders of that town shall bring the heifer down to an ever-flowing wadi, which is not tilled or sown.
Okay, so now I'm going to go into some symbolism here, right? It's going to be a sacrifice. Sorry if you get squeamish about the cow. The cow's about to die. Okay, there's a sacrifice, and the sacrifice is a completely unaffected cow in an unaffected wadi or stream, right? Meaning there is no strings on this one, right? There's no perpetrator. The victim is seen, obviously you see the body, but unknown to who it is. So, because by the way, if the victim were not unknown, then there could be some blood vengeance things, if the family and things like that. We have an unattached cow and an unattached, unworked stream. Go ahead.
There in the wadi, they shall break the heifer's neck.
That's the sacrifice. Go ahead.
The priests, Levites, shall come forward, for Adonai your God has chosen them to minister and to pronounce blessing in the name of Adonai. And every lawsuit in case of assault is subject to their ruling.
So, Stan, that goes back to your statement that there were different eras of different authorities. In this particular moment of authority, it's before courts were set up with rabbinic supervision and stuff like that. So it was the priests, it was the Levites. Go ahead.
Then all the elders of the town nearest to the corpse shall wash their hands over the heifer whose neck was broken in the wadi.
So stop for 1 second. I want you to picture, this is a little bit gory, I apologize. There is, the elders, who are also a source of authority, lean down into the stream where the blood of the heifer is spilling into the water, and they put blood on their hands.
Yeah.
As the elders of the town, and they watch as that blood is washed off by this otherwise unattached stream. The stream is becoming the court. And what are they doing? They're saying, there is an evil in our midst. We are momentarily taking on this blood guilt so that it can be washed from the community we represent. Now, I know this is not the way court cases work in modern times. I know that this is icky. There's a serious ick factor here. But as a symbolic ritual for a society that did peddle in animal sacrifice, this is an incredibly evocative moment where they take on the blood guilt, and they allow it to be washed away. That's the symbolism. Go ahead, Hillary, bring us home.
And they shall make this declaration. Our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see it done. Absolve Adonai, your people Israel, whom you redeemed, and do not let guilt for the blood of the innocent remain among your people Israel. And they will be absolved of blood guilt. Thus you will remove from your midst guilt of the blood of the innocent, for you will be doing what is right in the sight of Adonai.
So they're saying, we didn't do it, but we're taking it on because someone has to take it on so that the cosmos can be righted. There is injustice in the cosmos. Okay? Think of now. Obviously, you don't execute someone who theoretically, so you don't have a sacrifice because we want to kill someone because that we can't get the murderer executed. Like we don't do substitutive justice. Is that what you guys saying? You don't, that's not the way we work. However, what they're saying here symbolically is something much bigger. And it's something I think that we understand when we are confronted with the enormity of a crime that is sufficiently horrific, is to say, I feel like I need to take a shower. It's that bad. That's what I think we're saying here, right?
Question.
Yeah, questions and comments. Go ahead, Jim.
A heifer is young. They didn't take, like animals will pick the older infirmed. They didn't do that.
You never gave an infirm sacrifice. You had to give a perfected sacrifice. The fact that it is a younger calf or something like that may have been more logistic than anything. That is to say, if you were around for a while and you were a cow, you probably have been worked, right? It wouldn't have been easy to find, right? Okay. It's not like they had a whole reservoir of, going back to Amy's comment, it's not like people were waiting to do this one all the time, right? But I think it's a good point, right? I think it's a good point. Any other questions or comments?
Did they try to find the killer back in the day, or they just let him be?
Presumably they did, and it was just an unknown. It was an unsolvable crime. Yeah, I mean, the Torah often is terse on those things. I'm going to take down the share for a second so we can talk to one another. Go ahead, Jerry.
Isn't the fact that it's an unsolvable crime mean that therefore the community has to take full responsibility?
The community is taking it on and feels that, right?
The entire community, even though it didn't necessarily happen by anyone in that community.
Correct. We don't even know that. We don't even know now. And the only reason they seem to measure is because someone's got to take it on, right? And then, of course, the Talmud goes into what if it's equidistant between two towns? Like then the rabbis go into all their thing. I just now saw Josh's comment about the slaughter of a black church in Charleston. Absolutely, 100%. This is not a Jewish specific thing. We can all imagine, and our broader minds know that the enormity of certain crimes are so bad, and that's we don't tend as Jews. We don't tend to look inward for that. We tend to be actually horrified equally when human life, and I think that Judaism would affirm this, that the human life is sacred regardless of the religion of that human life, right? I mean, this one, obviously with the tree of life, hit close to home, but we can share our horror and frankly our empathy with others who have religiously motivated hate crimes as well.
Rabbi
yes.
Yanov, this long paragraph that we just read, do you think that there's an intention here to get communities to take on responsibility for the land, not only within their walls, but in this case, up to a point that's closest to another city? In other words, is this supposed to encourage better policing and awareness and guardianship of the countryside so that there will not be another unsolved murder?
So it's an interesting question. I think in ancient times, probably not, because people lived in city states, right? And you knew that if you were outside the walls after dark, you were in big trouble, right? Your life expectancy went down to hours if you were outside the walls. However, I think as we see this in modern times, the need to expand our orbit of responsibility, I think, is a good lesson, Josh, that you raised. The need to expand our orbit of responsibility such that there aren't sort of no man's land kind of, wild west sort of things. I mean, I think that many countries have seen that. And one of the hallmarks of a stable country is that there aren't unpoliced areas within its borders, right? So for a long time, my understanding is it's gotten better, though I don't know for sure, so don't make your travel plans based on what I'm about to say. But there were essentially desert pirates on the Sinai Peninsula because Egypt was unable, Egypt in its turmoil, post-Arab uprising spring, all the other stuff, Egypt was not able to police the Sinai Desert. And so Israelis who would go hiking there and because of the relationships between Israel and Egypt, were able to, with a passport, go and visit and tour, were not doing so, not because Egyptians didn't want Israelis there by any means. It was because Egypt was unable to secure the land within its borders and within its borders since the late 70s with the Camp David Accords, right? So I think that it is a good point to say kind of like we shouldn't say, oh, I can only govern this small amount, or I can only police this small amount of land. So anything out there, you're all in trouble, right? By the way, and we shouldn't be so, narrow-minded as to say it doesn't happen here too. Guess where it happened? You know that many of you know that I was a rabbi in Detroit before I was here. Detroit was a city built for about 2 million people that had about 650,000 people in it. And Detroit started to consolidate its trash and policing and said we don't have enough resources to provide services, necessary services, by the way, also fire, to the rest of the town. Now, during the day, I know it's crazy, right? And now during the day, that meant that there was a time in the early 2000s that virtually every action movie's high-speed car chase in an urban place that you saw was filmed in those parts of Detroit because they could simply close them down and go 120 miles an hour. By the way, it's 100% true. But you see that it's a very tricky thing. And so what is our sphere of influence, enforceability, and therefore responsibility? I'm mindful of the time, so I want to just kind of share with you what is on the last part here. I alluded to it, but it's really the last text that's on the third page is the one about sort of marching the convicted person out and being able to march him back, if there's any mitigating circumstances or testimony. The long text on the back side of the first sheet, I'm going to share again. Hold on. We're not going to read this whole thing. I'm going to go through it very quickly, just because of time. But I think it's a really important text because it's one of these texts that, when taken out of context, most of you probably have seen the punchline of this text, right? This is the text about how you caution these witnesses that maybe they are, going to cause a problem. And the word is, it says, Ketzad me'ayamin. How do you scare or intimidate the witnesses? They were brought in. These are the witnesses, by the way. These are not the suspected criminals. They were brought into a room with this panel of judges, 23 judges, one at a time. So you can imagine, Joseph Schmo out there happens to see a crime and said, don't do that. You're going to get yourself killed because it's a capital crime. And the guy says, yes, but even so, I'm going to do it. And he does it, right? And then he now is honor bound to go and commit, give the witness testimony. So they go in, this guy, right place, right time, wrong place, wrong time, I don't know, is now facing 23 impressive judges. And they say, do you know what you could do? Maybe you didn't fully see it. Maybe it was just a rumor. Maybe it was hearsay. Maybe that do you know how much interrogation you're going to bring on yourself? Do you know that this is a case of capital law and not monetary law? Fine, monetary law, you could make retribution, right? You could say, okay, I messed up, okay, pay him back, fine, whatever. There's no paybacks here. There's no givebacks in a capital case. In cases of capital law, if one testifies falsely, the blood of the accused and the blood of his offspring, not just this guy, but any future children he might have had, is all on your head. At this point in time, by the way, Joseph Schmo out there is probably looking for the nearest door, right? Okay. And they give a case of this, the proof of this is about a third of the way down, is Cain. By the way, not a great guy you want to be compared to, right? Killed his brother. Your brother, whoever this accused person is, that's your kinsman, is on your head. Right? And then it goes on and it becomes a little more theological. This is there where it says, therefore, about halfway down. Only Adam was created. It's not like God created, God created tons of fish, right? But only one human being to populate the earth, because we're all related to one another. This is your kinsman, right? And so then it goes a little more theological about 2/3 of the way down, and it says, God, yeah, sure, we all come from the same gene pool, but God, in God's wisdom, gives diversity. It's not like stamping a coin. But what that means is that we are all interconnected, and your testimony here could actually bring blood guilt yourself, right? You better be really stinking sure. And then this is the part that everyone, I think, might know. It says, since all humanity descends from one person, each and every person is obligated to say, Bishvili nivra ha'olam, the world was created for me. Right? Oh, I skipped one thing that you definitely all know, right? This is so, because we all come from one human being, if you kill one human being, it's like you have killed the entire world. And if you save the life of one human being, it is like you've saved the entire world. That's the saying that's on every Federation social justice pamphlet, right? Okay. A person who saves even one person is like they've saved the entire world, right? And so you're supposed to see yourself as infinitely extraordinary and worthy of life, even the person who committed a crime. And then the last 5 or 6 lines say, so now you're probably saying, Yosef Shmo, witness, why do I want to do this? Maybe I didn't see it. You think I didn't see it? Let's go with that. I'm out of here, right? Okay. And
Indoors.
well, yeah, get out, right? Okay. And they say, no, but if you did see it and you know that you're right, you're obligated to be a witness. You better do it because you have the right, you have the ability to get rid of evil from our land. You're the one who not only has the liability, but the ability, right? And perhaps you will say, why would we want to be responsible for the blood of this person? Which is what, by the way, the court has been saying to you for the last 30 verses here. Mm-hmm. And it says, and it says, be aware, when the wicked perish, there is have a way of bringing about justice in the world. And the name of this source sheet is in the, you saw it in the, you can see it in the bold in the bottom of the Hebrew that's right up there. Lachuv b'damo shel zeh. Why should I take on the responsibility of the blood guilt of this person who maybe isn't worth it because committed a capital crime to begin with? And I think that phrase, lachuv b'damo shel zeh, sort of encapsulates this sense of extreme caution about the death penalty, and yet the need to have the deterrence to sort of rewrite the cosmos of justice in the world. Far be it from me to speak for the families of the victims of the horrific crime of the Tree of Life synagogue shooting and the other synagogues that were housed and hosted there. I would just say that the extraordinary nature of this crime demanded some righting of the justice in the cosmos of the world. I'm not the one to say whether or not this was the right way, but let's have a little humility. Even if we are adamantly against the death penalty, the humility of seeing the enormity of that crime and knowing how off kilter the world seemed. I will tell you, even in Adif Israel, hundreds of miles away, that morning, the world seemed off kilter, let alone, as I say, all the more so in the people whose families and community members were directly affected by this loss. And so I think we can balance in a nuanced way the crimes that demand extraordinary response and the reticence in Judaism to actually affect that response. In a scary small amount of time, and by that I mean 10 days, we're going to say the most central prayer of Rosh Hashanah, which is the Unatana Tokef, which proclaims that God decides mi yichyeh umi yamut, who will live and who will die. When we rise to be a surrogate for God in that way, we must take that with great pause. And sometimes, as the last text said, we must write the cosmos if we can. That's what Judaism teaches here. It's not clear in each and every case, and it's worthy of debate in each and every case. And that's why you would never have a unanimous judgment in each and every case. It is clear that this is supposed to be difficult. That's the only thing that's clear about it, is that it's supposed to be unclear and difficult. And so I guess my bracha to finish off, my prayer in this moment as we finish off, is just that we know and recognize the role that we are being asked to step in when we participate in such high-level legal concerns. We know the power of deterrence. We know the power of the sense of justice in the cosmos, and we act with humility accordingly, regardless of the outcome of the actual sentence. Shana Tova, everyone.
Rabbi?
Yeah, I'm happy to stay for some questions too.
Where are we, Rabbi? I got turned around and went to 14 different buildings.
We are in One Liberty,
Yeah, but
33rd
finding this,
floor,
it's not easy.
1650 Market Street.
1650 Market.
Come in on Market,
If you come in on the Market Street entrance and you sign up, then you go up to the 33rd floor.
Liberty, you might be.
We will be next
I didn't.
next month. First Wednesday of the month is Chol HaMoed Sukkot. We are going to be in person at Adat Israel. I will be teaching, hopefully from the sukkah, if we can get Wi-Fi sufficient out there. And if not, just outside the sukkah and inside the building. And then it will be accessible from Holland and Knight here for CLE and wherever you are, just to learn together. Again, we're collecting the CLE forms both here at Holland and Knight and at Adat Israel, and we will submit them promptly, the yellow forms, right?
Yeah, and so if you're at the synagogue, make sure you sign, and here, make sure you sign the attendance sheet, that's number one. Make sure you fill out the blue form and retain the last page, that's number two. Make sure you fill out the yellow form, it's $30, put in the credit card number, retain the last page, and the name of the course is AI Lunch and Learn, Capital Punishment in Judaism. And any issues, just email me, Len Bernstein, and we'll help figure it out. And thank you for being with us. We'll be in both locations next time, and we'll keep this going.
Same bad channel.
Thanks.
Take care. Bats channel. Yeah. Take care.
Thank you, that was really enlightening.
Tricky topic.
Good question.
Take care, everyone. Adat Israel, I'll be back there in 20 minutes.
Okay, bye.
With luck.